Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Roxana Ashtari. I'm a project specialist at UNWTO Sustainable Development of Tourism Department. And today we are with you to host a mini webinar session on measurement of greenhouse gas emissions. These conversations are being held to complement the overview of methodologies and tools to measure greenhouse gas emission, which was released in March 2023 at ITB Berlin. Under the overview, a series of case studies have been developed featuring the effort of several signatories of Glasgow Declaration to advance climate action, with emphasis on their approach towards measurement and its impact on decarbonization and regeneration. The conversation of today is with Paul Easto, founder of Wilderness Group, and this session is being recorded and will be posted on the event page, same as the previous sessions, and you can watch them later. Without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Jeremy Smith, who helped us to develop these case studies. And Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roxana, and thank you everyone for coming to watch and to listen today. Paul, I'll go straight to join with you. Paul, you're the founder of Wilderness Group based in Ireland and Scotland, to my understanding. Perhaps it's more widely spread, and you can please share with us. I'd love you to start, for those people who don't know anything about the company, to just give us an introduction to the Wilderness Group, what it is you do, what sort of tourism are you involved with?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. So the Wilderness Group comprises three different companies: Wilderness Scotland, Wilderness Ireland, and Wilderness England. And we're a tour operator in DMC that operates throughout the UK and Ireland, offering a range of active and nature-based travel experiences. So we organise things, for example, walking and cycling holidays, both for groups and also on a private basis. Typical trips would be a week-long in duration. They might visit one or two destinations in those countries. And like any tour operator, we will organise transportation, guides, accommodation, food, and other activities as part of the travel experience.
Brilliant, thank you. For everyone listening, do feel free to ask questions into the chat during Paul and my conversation, or at the end we'll leave a few minutes if people want to ask a question directly on camera, and so feel free to do it then as well. But now we're here to talk very much about climate measurement and climate action, something that Wilderness Group has moved forward, with some significant momentum over the last few years. But let's take a step back to start with, Paul. I mean, when did the company really start working on any sort of climate issues, and how's it developed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I mean the history does go back quite some time, and we've been in operation 21 years now. And I think we probably started to make some efforts in sort of about 2006, 2007 originally, and that was just before the financial crisis. And there were a number of initiatives that we were working on there that we were involved with that then didn't come to fruition because of what happened. With the wider economy. But it was probably in the last sort of 3 to 4 years that we have accelerated our efforts with a much better understanding of the science. And I think everybody's awareness of the topic and how we should be dealing it on a scientific basis has developed enormously. And that was really the motivation for us to say, the data is now there to suggest that we need to be doing something now, not tomorrow. And realistically, what can we do about it? And in order to make the progress that we'd like, we really need a much better understanding of what our total carbon footprint is as an organisation. And that was the starting point for us.
Okay, when Tourism Declares launched in January 2020, I'm pretty certain that Wilderness Scotland and Wilderness Ireland at the time signed up within the first few weeks. You were right there at the beginning of the Glasgow Declaration in 2020, signing up there in 2021 rather. And through both of those commitments, you committed to publishing a rigorous climate action plan, which you have very much done. You didn't just do that by yourself, did you? You worked with a consultancy in order to develop it. Can you just share with us all about the process of developing your climate action plan?
Yeah, the process. In some ways, we had an opportunity around COP26 that took place in Glasgow. Get my date back in November 2020. 2021, yeah, yes. The pandemic clouded all the judgment with all that, but yeah, that provided a real kind of focus for us to complete the work that we were wanting to do for some time. And we realized quite early on in the process, although we had fairly rudimentary calculators and tools to allow us to calculate the carbon impact of our business. And I think most of us will have access to those things from business travel and our electricity consumption, even our vehicle fleet that we have. The one thing that was really missing was a detailed understanding of what the supply chain impact was, those kind of scope 3 emissions that many of us to be familiar with. And at that point, we realized we probably needed some help in order to do that well. We looked around at various partners we could work with. Some of them, I think, offered quite easy to access tools, but they were fairly incomplete. I feel, for example, some of the tools out there don't allow you to calculate food emissions arising from tour itineraries, which we felt was a very significant part of that. And we came across a company called the E-Collective that had been working with one or two other tour operators before us, who had a very, I guess, simple to understand methodology that we could partner with them to calculate what the total footprint was of all of our tours. And just to provide a bit of context, I mean, for us, that's about 120 different itineraries. We would have about 700 groups a year, about 5,000 or so guests. So in effect, we were having to calculate the individual carbon footprint of around about 100 plus itineraries.
And when you went through this detailed look into the relative carbon emissions of your different trips, did you learn anything that was surprising? Places that you found hotspots, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of surprises, to be honest. I mean, the first was just how significant those trip-related emissions are to the overall carbon footprint of the organization. So, it's 80% plus. We had, and I think many schemes, accreditation schemes and assessments we've done in the past weighted quite a lot towards the office operations of a business in looking at climate impact, perhaps because that was an easy thing to measure. But for us, we realized quite quickly that the lion's share was absolutely in the emissions that were happening on a trip. And so just for example, I mean, food alone is nearly 30% of the total emissions. And when you start to look at that and what you can do to possibly change things, you realize that there's opportunity, but there's also challenge, because many of those emissions are beyond your immediate control. And things like accommodation, for example, it's quite hard to affect the change you'd like to see that would make the difference that we would like to see in this topic.
So essentially, so you say food was 30%. How does it sort of roughly pan out with, say, transport and accommodation?
Yeah, so I mean, really, you've got accommodation is around about a third, food is just under a third, transportation is about a quarter, and then you've got ancillary activities and things related to that. When you look at that, I mean, that's really informed the climate change strategy that we've got in terms of what things can we target in order to achieve the emission reductions that we've set for ourselves and confirm with the Science Based Targets Initiative.
So, I mean, you mentioned there the strategy and the targets you set yourselves. They're very ambitious. I mean, we talked about them before, that you set yourself particularly bold, ambitious goals beyond, as far as I understand, some of the science-based targets and even the commitments in Glasgow Declaration. What incentivized you to set such ambitious goals, and can you share some more about that strategy?
Yeah, I think looking back, it seems somewhat overambitious, but I'll be quite honest about that. I mean, I think where it was driven from was the belief that we all understand that the science-based target is around 50% reduction by 2030. That's the sort of goal that we're all aiming for. Our feeling was if we could set ourselves a goal that was much more aggressive than that, then even if we missed our stretch target, then we would be well within the 50% goal that overall that we're seeking. And I think where we're currently at as an organization is that we've achieved some good reductions already. And I think we can see the pathway to 50% reductions absolutely over the next 7 years now that we have. Beyond that, I think there's technology and changes that we just haven't yet seen that need to happen in order for us to reach the stretched goal that we've set for ourselves.
Okay, so where do you see, I mean, where are the places that you've seen you're most able to make, and, you know, to other tour operators listening in today, that you think these are the places to, you know, the low-hanging fruit, should we say, and then this is what's going to be harder?
Yeah, we got really excited back at you know, and sort of 2019-20 when we moved our main office premises and operational base in Scotland, and you know, there's around about 50 people based there, and it was to a new building that was ultra energy efficient, powered by you know, renewable heating and hot water systems. It's effectively a net zero building. But unfortunately, that only reduced our emissions by 4%. We thought it was going to be much more than that. And although, you know, it provides, I guess, a good, it's a good beacon for the direction of travel that we'd like to take, it didn't quite have the impact that we would hope. So although there's things there that I think people might be able to tangibly put their finger on and say that's going to make a big difference, I think if you are a tour operator, and this is very different if you're a property, you know, if a property would be a different dynamic. But if you're a tour operator, the bulk of those emissions are in the tours themselves, and that has to be the priority. So for us, one of the initial efforts we're making is around the electrification of our vehicle fleet. We've got about 30 vehicles across the destinations that we work in that we own and run. They're currently diesel. We've started to introduce electric vehicles already. We've got another 6 coming within the next 6 months. Our hope is within probably 2 to 3 years, the entire fleet will be electrified. We then need to be sure that those vehicles are obviously powered by renewable energy, which is the case on site where we are. But you know, across the destinations we work in, there needs to be obviously the network and the infrastructure to support what we want to do. But that would make a sort of 20% saving. It's over 2 years worth of the target that we've set for ourselves. And then beyond that, a lot of it's in product design and in food reduction, actually. I mean, and I think one of the things we've really focused on recently is on food choices and food waste. And you can help me out here, Jeremy, but I heard that if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter after China and the US, which is just a staggering statistic in terms of how it contributes to total greenhouse gas emissions. So we're looking quite carefully at the waste issues that exist on trips and also the food choices. So introducing you know, more vegetarian foods within the say a week-long itinerary. 2 of the evening meals we might have, in simple terms, will be vegetarian as opposed to being free choice, and that in itself will make quite a material difference to the total food emissions.
That's fascinating to hear, and I concur with your analysis of food waste, which I had heard similar statistics on, and also that it is the 3rd largest contributor to greenhouse emissions overall, not just when compared as a country. You've also made a very active sort of commitment and effort, not just to keep this to yourself, but to share what you are doing. I mean, here we are talking about it today. I think already has been shared in the chat links to the methodology that you've used to build your strategy and to measure your various impacts. You've also gone to communicate this to tourists. I mean, you're one of the very few tour operators that I know of, and therefore one of the first to go back to actually put a label, let's say a climate label, attached to each one of your trips to say what the relative emissions are from one trip to another. Let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, first of all, what made you decide to do it, and how's it been received?
Yeah, I mean, this was something we discussed at length with consultancy we work with. They had done it with a few other clients that they'd worked with previously, and it was on the basis that and I think this is sort of, you know, comes to one of the questions that's come in there. The transparency piece is just so important for us on this, and we're a growing business. You know, we have ambition to grow. We believe in sharing the power of positive tourism, and that means, you know, trying to grow our business. And if you're a growing business, then your footprint, unless you're making very, very significant material reductions on an annual basis that go well and beyond your growth, it may actually increase even if you know, you're doing a lot of good work. So for us, the intention was to try and identify a metric that showed that we were still making progress with the measures that we wanted, reflecting the fact that we are a growing business. So if that makes sense, essentially by looking at it on a per guest or, you know, per passenger basis, that was a much fairer metric to say, is our business making progress to actually reduce our total emissions? I mean, if we can get that per guest number down to the lowest number possible, and the theory is we should be able to accommodate more travelers at the same or less carbon footprint as a whole. So that was why that metric was chosen for one reason. But the second reason was equally important, was just trying to give customers an idea of what the actual impact and consequence was of their holiday purchasing decisions. And in the same way as we probably more commonly now look at foodstuffs and can see the calorie intake that we might be, or the amount of fat or carbohydrate, protein, it would be great if consumers could look at their holiday choices and say, well, if I choose this option, then it's X amount of CO2 equivalent, and if I choose this, it's Y. And at least I've got the information to make the decision. Right now, consumers just don't have that information. There are one or two other operators that are doing this, which is great. I'd love to see it a bit more normalized. So this becomes a common currency when people come to booking a holiday.
Indeed. I mean, as you said, there are one or two. It's beginning, but it's coming out of the individual tour operator themselves, which I think there's a lot to be said for, at this early stage, for different people exploring in their own different ways. And we learn more by people doing it their own way now, rather than just having a blanket, this is how everyone must do it. But how do we move beyond initial early adoption, sort of, front running tour operators like yourselves going ahead and doing something, to something that is sector wide, industry wide? What would you like to see? Yeah,
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Look, there's a couple of key points here. One is, it would be great if there was a common methodology, because then consumers will be comparing like for like. I think that's just not realistic at the moment. My view is that even if these methodologies are not necessarily complete or in some ways flawed, as long as they are accurate enough to provide the consumer with an indication. I mean, and you see this quite a lot in flight carbon calculators. If any of us have looked, you can get a wildly different result depending on which tool or calculator you use. I mean, I think we're looking for some consistency, but I would encourage anyone to really give it a go, start on the journey, because the more that this is seen by the consumer, I think the more it will be demanded. And I think that's probably the key to change, is there be a, to get the flywheel moving, there to be a critical mass of operators that are presenting this information to consumers. So it becomes a question for most that says, well, this is strange, I'm not actually seeing this information alongside the price and the dates of a particular holiday. But what I'd love to see is probably some of the mainstream larger tour operators doing this, that would then put it in much more into the public conscience. Right.
We're going to turn to see if anyone in the audience has some questions. There are a couple of questions that you alluded to in the chat. Both actually relate to what one includes in measurement. So I'll sort of share them both with you, and you can address them as you. One person looking to see, from Michelle Harvey, are you able to measure food waste on your tours? And what is the approach you'd look to reducing the impacts of food waste? Is it simply ordering less food, or are there other ways you can impact on the emissions from food? And then from Heather Davis, do you include the emissions of your clients traveling to and from your tours, or is the transport component of your emissions measurement solely that on your own vehicles? So yeah, we'd go to know about those two.
So to Michelle's question there's no easy way to measure it. What we're trying to do is to capture real data from the field, from our guides. Most of our tours that we provide are guided, and it's as simple as looking at the end of a meal to say how much food is actually left on the table, and can we respond to that with some practical measures. And this is a suggestion I had from another tour operator, was that would be speaking to hotels in advance to say, could you do split portions? So this isn't about shortchanging a customer, but it's saying to them, would you I think we see that in some restaurants now, like small plates, large plates. We'll still pay the supplier the same money, but can you reduce the portion sizes based on what you're otherwise normally providing? So I think that's a very practical measure. We need to get a bit of a better understanding as to exactly how big the problem is before we can kind of respond to it in the way we'd like. So this year is very much a kind of information gathering year. So Heather's question, yeah, I mean, we're very transparent about this. The transportation elements are included, but only the in-country transportation. So it doesn't include the emissions arising from customers getting to and from the destination. We have visitors from around the world. Some travel by train from within the UK to our trips. Some are coming from North America, where there is no alternative. It isn't ideal. But we don't control the booking process in terms of travel, and it's something that we're very kind of mindful of. And I think in the interest of transparency and awareness, if you look at the total emissions arising from most people's tours, not everyone, because some types of travel are very carbon intensive, such as cruising. But if you are a land-based operator, the overwhelming carbon impact will be from to and from the destination if you're traveling by air. So we all need to be mindful of that and be very transparent when we're communicating with customers.
I'm just wondered, I mean, so I can see there's no other questions at the moment. Does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to ask at this moment? If you do, in the next few minutes, please just either jump in or use the hand up question. There's a question from Jaime from Visit Valencia. Thank you, Jaime. I see then background. Do you feel your customers, Paul, are reacting positively to your initiatives? Have you actually seen financial benefits from it?
Yeah, so around 60% of our business is direct to consumer, and then 40% is business to business or with the trade. That's actually a very positive response from the trade, the industry, and I think the people here today within the tourism community. And there's been a lot of interest and intrigue in what we've been doing, and I've sort of shared similar sessions and an approach with many of our partners. So that's been very positive. I think that's been encouraging. On the B2C, the consumer side, perhaps not as much as we would like. I think this is probably a consistent theme across, sustainability and travel. It feels to me that, customers perhaps, that they like to know that it's there, but they're not necessarily using it as a primary purchasing decision. So we've had some questions, and particularly our guides have had some questions around the methodology and things, but probably not as much as we would like. And that's perhaps because, like you said, Jeremy, we're very much in the minority with this.
Okay. I'll come for a final question, which just to sort of slightly shift focus a bit. I mean, still talking about climate action, but there's more to climate action. There's more to, as it expressed through the pathways of the Glasgow Declaration. There's also work on leaving a positive impact on regeneration, on ecosystem restoration. As a company with wilderness in your name and wilderness in your raison d'etre, you do a lot of work in the places where you take guests. You've got a conservation and communities fund, and these are very much connected to how we as tourists, as a tourism, can have a positive impact. Could you share some of that work and how it connects to your climate action? Yeah, sure.
Be happy to do that. Yeah, over it's probably about 12 years or so ago now, we set up what was at that time called a client conservation contribution scheme. And it's a very simple mechanism whereby it was an optional payment on booking towards environmental, at that time, purely environmental, projects that were located in the destination area. I'm sure many people on today or otherwise listening will have something similar or be familiar with it. It's something that we've evolved over the years now, and we extended it to cover both communities and conservation. And to give you an idea of some of the things that we've invested in as a business as a result of doing that is we have worked on footpath restoration in key locations we're in. Obviously, these are physical assets that we would use as a company, on montane forest restoration, on installing Scotland's first sea bin to collect plastic ocean waste in one of the key locations. These are projects that we work on an annual or every 2 or 3 year basis to fund and support, where ideally, we can get involved as a business. Our employees can volunteer on those programs, but in the optimum situation, we would have our customers, our guests be able to visit many of these locations where we work to see firsthand the impact of their financial support and contribution to the long-term health of a destination. And with many of these projects, there are, there's a direct, carbon benefit as well when we start to talk about reforestation, but it isn't the primary focus of that work. It's much about, positive landscape enhancement, community support and engagement. And, when we allow our guests to experience that, I think, they make that immediate connection and a much stronger connection with the destination they're traveling to.
So would you say, actually, I mean, I think you did say there, but that it's making that connection to guests through this positive work is one of the ways to address the challenge that you mentioned previously, that if it's not resonating with guests around a number on emissions, but it does resonate around the positive impact that one is having to the natural world.
And I think if there's one takeaway from today that we've believed in since we started our business, if you allow people to experience these special places and special communities around the world, then they're going to be better protected. And I think we would probably not be in the state that we're in had, senior politicians, world leaders and decision makers be more familiar and sensitive to those environments and communities. And there's nothing more powerful when someone does travel to our destination and see the impact of what is being done, and then themselves actually reinvest. And we've had a number of situations where people have been so inspired by the work that's going on the ground from a conservation or community standpoint that they have then directly gone into their own pockets and made a very significant contribution to the ongoing work. And that would never happen if they hadn't had the opportunity to travel experience. So, and I think that's why it's really important when we're considering climate, that we are taking a very balanced view to the positive benefits of tourism and not just looking at the downsides of international travel.
Perfect place to come to an end of this conversation. Paul, thank you very much for your continued action and transparency and willingness to share the work that you're doing. I'd recommend for everyone to go and have a look at the stuff in the links. There's some really sort of front-running work on climate action there. I hand you back to Roxana to close the session. Thanks, Paul, for your chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think there is a question from Monica. I'm not sure we addressed that, just to make sure.
My apologies. I think the question asks, are buses, is it the fact that people are doing less coaches and less buses going to mean that they are more reduced? There's less emissions?
Yeah, so I think hi Monica, the case for those operators that are organising walking and cycling tours is you have it's human power, it's fantastic, zero carbon. You will have very limited impact as a result of the activity. You're going to have your emissions weighted towards accommodation and food in destination. And that's a really important point, I think, from a product design standpoint. Something that we're looking at is how, as an operator, recognizing that 20% of those emissions relate to transport, how can we design products that involve a lot less traveling by vehicle for those where we do use a vehicle? And in that way, we can bring down the emissions alongside, electrification of the vehicles that we have.
Thank you. Over to you, Roxana.
Thank you very much. Actually, it was a very interesting and inspiring journey to learn about different aspects. It was very interesting to hear about your emphasis on food waste. I just posted in the chat about the global roadmap that at UNWTO we are about to publish in a few weeks. And we are happy to let you know that within that framework, you can learn a lot how to measure, what to measure, and like the focus, which are focused basically on to circulate and divert from the landfill. So I think you really can find this information very interesting. If you go to the webpage, there is a link that you can submit your email address there. So once the publication is out, we will inform you accordingly or regularly. I hope you check our website and media so you can get to know when it's published. So thank you again for joining us. You know that this mini series, we have so far 5 sessions. All the recordings are being posted on the webpage. I just put the link for the next one, which is going to be in Spanish, but the recording, all of these sessions are available alongside with the case studies. And please reach out to us whenever you have a question or if you need any further support from our side. Thank you for your time and hope to see you soon. Have a nice day.
Thank you.